What's the point of being a billionaire if the planet is going to be burning? All the things that modern society tells you that you should pursue and that will make you happy is actually wrong. In fact, it produces suffering.
Exactly.
I'm actually an algorithm trained by millions of rejections, of reinforcement learning.
All right, guys, welcome back to Built in America. We have Diego Saez Gil. He's the CEO of Pachama, a really cool company. I'm going to have him dive deep on the company that he's built today. Diego, welcome to the show.
Thank you for the invitation, Sam. Excited to be here.
Diego, you grew up in the Andes. You've been surrounded by nature your entire life. Shaped this conversation around that and the company you built today. Debrief us on a little bit of your background.
Yeah, I did grow up in a place called Tucumán in the north of Argentina, surrounded by a beautiful forest called La Yunga. And as a kid, my grandparents from the two sides had houses in the mountains in the forest. And so I spent many of my summers in my childhood playing among trees and in the rivers with my brothers and cousins. And yeah, little did I know that I was going to end up building a company around my passion for nature. But yeah, that is what inspired me eventually to start this company. I actually studied in university in Argentina, and then I got the chance to complete a master's in Barcelona, got a scholarship that I got through the internet, and I moved from Argentina to Barcelona. I worked in consulting for 2 years there. And while I love Barcelona, it's a beautiful city to live in, I didn't feel that it was the most appropriate entrepreneurial environment. So that called me to come to the US. And I came to New York City, actually, to do an internship. I arrived in the middle of the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And I decided to start a company, as an immigrant without still being able to speak English very well, without any connections and without a lot of money in my bank account. But sometimes entrepreneurs, sometimes I guess you thrive in the most difficult situations out of necessity. So that was my origin as an entrepreneur here in America. And it was a long journey. I built 2 companies before Pachama, and but these 2 companies, which we can go into it, but were a big education for me to go into my true passion, which is what I'm doing with Pachama now.
Tell me a little bit about those 2 companies. First and foremost, the fact that you're building a company around nature and the wildlife and so forth is immaculate because everybody's talking about space today. I'm hearing a lot about building in the ocean as well. Massive total addressable market. And now you're building in the world of nature and you're using AI to go build that today. Walk us through why you're doing this.
Yeah, I mean, we can take either direction, but before going into Pachama and the opportunity that we're pursuing there, the first 2 companies that I built were actually around another passion of mine, which was travel. And we talked a little bit about travel before we connected online, but when I moved from Argentina to Barcelona, in Europe, it's so easy to travel from countries to countries. I bought an Eurorail ticket and I backpacked in different European countries, and I became fascinated by youth travel movement. And at the time, it was actually very difficult to book a hostel or any place to stay. It was the beginning of smartphones. So there wasn't any app to book a hostel. So with a friend, we decided to build one. And we built an app called We Hostels. At the time, it was also when Facebook had just released the Connect feature where you could connect with Facebook and then you could see other friends that were using product that you were using. So it was a fun app to book a place to stay, see if there was any friend of friend going to the city you were going, and then, also trying to create a community around travel. That company, it was my first startup. I had no idea what I was doing. I eventually was able to raise $1.2 million from angel investors in New York, which I was totally blown away that, a kid, an immigrant, could be trusted with this money. And I think this is the beauty of this country, right? The openness to immigrants, to good ideas, to people who can innovate. And that company grew, again, just out of being the only one in the App Store. You would go to the App Store at the time and you put hostels or hotels, and our app was the first. Eventually, we got a lot of competition from Booking.com and Airbnb, and we felt the pressure to either raise money or sell the company. And we eventually decided decided to sell the company, and we sold it to Student Universe, which was a unit of Flight Center, one of the biggest travel agencies in the world. And I became part of that team, and we continue building travel apps inside of that company. Right after that, I traveled to Argentina to visit my family, and I was bringing gifts on my suitcase for Christmas, and the airline lost my suitcase. And I got very frustrated. And I was like, how come? It was the emergence of smartwatches and smart thermostats and smart everything. And yet I couldn't find any smart luggage that I can track and know where it is. So once again, we went with another friend of mine, with a group of friends actually this time, and decided to build the first smart connected suitcase. We launched a crowdfunding campaign that was very successful. We got into Y Combinator. I moved from New York to California. And then we raised a round of funding. Then I moved to China to manufacture the product. I was in the golden era of free trade, which now is, unfortunately being, a challenge with these tariffs and so forth. But it was an amazing experience of going and trying to do something really hard, such as launching an electronics product. And we managed to ship tens of thousands of units of this product. We eventually faced a big challenge when the airlines decided to ban lithium-ion batteries, when the Samsung phones started getting on fire on some airplanes. And you might remember there was a time in which there was banners on the airports. You cannot check lithium-ion batteries.
Yeah.
And our suitcases unfortunately had that. So from one day to another, we had a black swan event. We couldn't sell our products anymore. And that led us to try to sell the company. And we managed to sell it to Travel Pro, which is a big travels product company in Florida, actually. And they were very interested in the IP that we had built. We had built several patents and unique technologies to track objects around the world. And they found that valuable. And we managed to sell the company and close that chapter. And so I'm summarizing, of course, 5 or 6 years of my life that went very fast, super intense, on an airplane all the time. And after that, I ended up both burnout, as many entrepreneurs find themselves at some point, but also feeling that everything I had learned could be applied to something hopefully more purposeful and more impactful for the world.
To go build 2 startups and sell them both to, large ventures, even though one company was failing because they couldn't get lithium batteries on a plane and you couldn't distribute that product anymore, is quite impressive, right? And now you're on your 3rd venture right now. You have, large investors. It looks like Serena Williams has invested in you, and some big names behind that today.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the form of raising capital. You're an immigrant. You came from Argentina. A lot of people are interested in building big business today. And raising capital is something that's very difficult to go do if it's your first go about doing so. As an immigrant coming to this country, how are you able to go pitch these investors to want to take a chance on you for someone who didn't have the experience here, didn't go to Wharton, he doesn't have the investment banking and PE background?
Yeah.
And you went and did it. And if you were to give one message today to the audience, what would you tell them?
It was hard. I got rejected so many times. I have a friend of mine who tells me, Diego, you're a natural at fundraising. You're so good at this. And I'm like, man, I'm actually an algorithm trained by millions of rejections, of reinforcement learning. But so I think the first message is that it's a numbers game. I remember listening to the founder of JetBlue, who's a Mormon. And as a Mormon, he had to do the evangelization and go to South America and knock on doors. And he knew that he was going to be rejected 99 times out of 100. And it was just a numbers game, right? So, and that helped him as an entrepreneur. So I took that message to heart, and I was like, okay, I need to be rejected 99 times to get one check. That ratio improves over time, of course, because you get better, you build a network, and you know how to talk to investors. But at the beginning, you just have to go through that experience without taking your ego, too much, because sometimes, when you're a young entrepreneur, when someone rejects you, you feel that they're rejecting you, the person, but they might just be rejecting the idea, the timing, and it's not personal. So you don't have to take it personal. Now, the second thing I would say is that, and this is something very important, when you are going and pitching an investor, you're not going and asking for money. You're inviting them to a journey where you're going to go together to discover an opportunity, and you're giving them the chance to be part of something that you feel has a huge upside, right? So I think it's a different mindset to say, I'm going to ask you for money versus I'm going to invite you and give you the chance to come into this journey. And in this journey, we can succeed or we can fail, but we're going to go together and we're going to work as a team to create something valuable for the world.
Diego, as you're pitching, there's something called obviously intrinsic value, and then there's net present value and future value. How would you define value today?
You know, it's very difficult, especially in a moment of so much uncertainty like today. But I think that you always have to think, and this is something that Y Combinator taught me. What is the biggest possible shape that this idea could take, right? Take Airbnb. They started as, renting an airbed on your living room.
Bed and breakfast.
Exactly. But then Y Combinator made them think, well, you can be the platform where any real estate gets rented, right? Similarly, when we went with Pachama, and I'd love to go into Pachama now, but they told us, well, what is the biggest possible shape that this idea can take? And then you can make a market sizing assessment that is about the future that doesn't exist. And then you put a probability to that. It doesn't mean that this future is going to happen. But if it happens, you will build something massive, and then the adjusted value of what you're building, it's worth the investment, right? I think that's the way to think about venture style startups. For other types of business, there might be some more analytical ways of valuing cash flows and kind of like more short-term things. But I think when you're starting something new that has a big transformational power, it's about imagining that big vision, that big market size, and your role in that market size, and then adjusting it by the probabilities.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it in perspective, right? I actually invest in a lot of founders, startups, search funders, as we call it. People want to go buy these small businesses. And I look at value in a very similar facet. As there's a dream outcome that's right here, and there's a probability of achievement. And I'm trying to bridge that gap as much as possible. Yeah. Hopefully that the story that you're telling me along the journey for the next 5 years can get me from point A to point B with the least amount of friction, right? And I like the way that you go compel that. You probably sat in front of Sam Altman at Y Combinator and, pitched him this luggage over here that was tracking where your luggage is going all over the world. And I think that's a fantastic way of going about it. And now you've started Pachama. You've taken probably a lot of time in between both companies, I assume, to really think about how you can go make real impact and what your purpose is on what kind of company you want to go build today.
Yeah.
Walk me through Pachama. Tell me why you built this company.
Yeah. I took about a year between the sale of my last company and the beginning of this new one. And during that year, I traveled. In one of my trips was actually to the Amazon Rainforest, which is this massive ecosystem that is just visiting is transformational, right? And I came back from that trip both inspired by the power of nature and also worried about the deforestation that is still happening in the Amazon rainforest, and it's happening around the world, unfortunately. We are destroying these ecosystems to just, do cattle ranching or to dig gold or to, do things that can be done more productively in a different land. And this is just because we don't value nature itself. And it turns out that one of the services that forest and other ecosystems provide is that they sequester CO2 back from the atmosphere to the ground, right? When a tree grows, it effectively converts CO2 into biomass and locks that down into the ground. And it can lock it down for millions of years if that ecosystem continues to thrive. And in a scenario like what we have today, where we have put too much CO2 into the atmosphere, that is producing global warming, and that is a big crisis for humanity. We should give value to carbon, and we should pay landowners, land stewards for the carbon that they're sequestering. That's something that I kind of arrived as I was talking to people and making sense from first principles. But then I came to learn that there was already a carbon credits market. There was a market in which companies, especially the biggest companies in the world, were committing to measure their CO2 emissions, to reduce, and then to compensate by investing in carbon credits. And then those carbon credits could be given to landowners that would reforest or increase the size of their forest or just conserve forests that were under threat. And I found it fascinating that we could create and in our case, help expand a market for environmental services. And land is the biggest asset in the world. Land is what the planet is made of. And today we value land in a very distorted way because we don't give value to the environmental services that the land provides. Now, this market, the carbon credits market, was very interesting, but it had many problems. The biggest problem was a problem of trust. You're a company in the US, you need to send a check to Brazil, and you need to trust that a landowner in Brazil is going to plant trees so that you can claim that your product is carbon neutral, right? And that, of course, is not easy to do. The way that used to be done was by sending an auditor every 5 years to go and check in a sample of the forest whether the trees were there, right? And of course, that led to a lot of people taking advantage of the system, right? And phantom forest or exaggerations of the numbers, and that led to people criticizing this market, and that unfortunately was an obstacle. The technologies that we saw that could be transformative here were satellite data and AI, right? Coming from a previous company where we use satellite data to track the luggage, I was aware that we are launching new satellites every week. Thanks to companies like SpaceX that made reusable rockets, faster and cheaper to launch objects to space, and thanks to big advancements in computing that allows satellites to shrink, we have now the chance to observe every corner of the Earth with satellite data on a frequent basis. And then with AI, we can process that data to automate the monitoring, the reporting, and the verification of carbon credits projects. So that was the core idea. No one was doing that at the time. And so we came to market with the proposition, we're going to help companies that want to invest in high quality carbon credits around the world source and diligence and send money to those projects. And then in turn, we're going to help those projects complete their package and get access to the financing from corporates and from investors that want to invest in these projects. And today we have helped, over 100 projects in 15 different countries get access to tens of millions of dollars from some of the biggest companies in the world, the likes of Salesforce and Amazon and Nespresso. And it's been fascinating to see the power of an idea and the power of technology to bring more trust. Of course, we're still at the beginning of our journey and we have many challenges in front of us, but it's been great to see already, the flow of capital going towards protecting and restoring nature.
Diego, there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, what you're doing is incredibly unique yet incredibly complicated at the same time.
Yes.
And it warrants, the investors that you brought to the table. Imagine I am a fifth grader right now. I don't know anything about carbon credits today. What does a sales process look like to go from, your initial land that you're looking at to the deploying capital to the getting a carbon credit for a consumer?
Yeah, good question. It is complicated and at the same time is quite simple, right? There is land, and in that land you can plant trees, or you can make the trees that you have already grow bigger, or you can keep a forest standing that otherwise would be cut down. If you do that, you can get credits for the carbon that you're sequestering. And if you're a landowner, you can go and enroll into a program, or if you are a project developer, similar to real estate, you can go and enroll a lot of landowners in your region to do that. And then you measure and estimate how much carbon you will generate over the next few years. With that, you can submit to companies or investors that want to invest upfront into those projects. And then you're going to have to go to someone to certify that your carbon credits are real. And then you can exchange those carbon credits in the marketplace. Now, on the other side, you're a company. You have committed to sell a carbon neutral product. Like, for example, Apple is selling their Apple Watch as a carbon neutral product. That means that they estimate how much carbon they emit on the making of the Apple Watch. And then they go and source projects that are going to sequester carbon to compensate for those carbon emissions. Now, we act as a connective tissue between these parties. And our technology is what allows us to observe those lands, those forests from afar, and to independently check the validity of the claims. So it's it's a complex process, but like any market, um, you know, players are driven by, their own objectives, and then eventually they're coordinated by, different actors and the market forces.
That's a massive mission. I think it's really cool that you're actually building a company that has a mission that actually helps the overall Earth on a global impact as well. And talk me through how you got started, obviously. So this is not an easy process to do. You built an entire team around this. You ranged from Amazon, Bizstone, Serena Williams, Breakthrough Energy Ventures. So this is not your first rodeo of capital raising. You went from angel investors to Y Combinator. You keep climbing the ladder more and more now, and it becomes a bigger prize. So what do you think, intrigued investors so much about this idea?
Sam, when I started Pachama, I was not sure whether investors were going to be interested at all on this company. I was afraid that they would think, well, this looks like a nonprofit. You're just trying to save some trees. This looks like a hippie project, right? And some did. Frankly, some investors did say like, Diego, this is a great idea, but it's not for me. But interestingly, I think we hit a chord with investors that saw what we were talking before. There is a future in which the global economy needs to address climate change, and therefore is under strong pressure to put a price on carbon and have to pay for the carbon emissions that it produces. And that creates a massive carbon market where billions, actually hundreds of billions of dollars flow from the economy towards landowners that can sequester that carbon back into the earth. And we have almost 1 billion hectares of land available for restoration that could receive funding from, an economy that needs to compensate gigatons of CO2. If that future happens, then there's going to be a company that will help architect this market and will help transfer those hundreds of billions of dollars, and that company will be really big. Now, the chance of that future happening is probably low because, for example, right now we are in a geopolitical moment in which climate change is not top priority for many governments. But again, we're looking at the long arc of the future, right? And so I think that rationale resonated with many investors. And interestingly, with some of the most successful investors, people who already made money. And now they're not thinking about making money. They're thinking about what future planet are we going to inherit to our kids? What's the point of being a billionaire if the planet is going to be burning, right? So those type of investors, the likes of Chris Sacca, Paul Graham, Bizstone, and many others said, I like this. I want to support you. You are an experienced founder now, and we want to come into the journey with you. And yeah, it's been fascinating to be able to raise, amazing, money from amazing backers, and still, it's as difficult as any other company. But it's great to count with investors that also are experienced on their own on building businesses.
And Diego, you're the founder and CEO of this company. Who's been influential on the journey with you on your team?
Yeah, good question. So, of course, when you start any project, is the first few people that follow you are so important, right? Because at the beginning, I don't know if you saw this video of this guy who starts a movement by start dancing on a meadow, and then one person comes in, and then a bunch of people come in eventually, right? But the first followers are so important. In my case, was my co-founder and CTO, Tomas. He was actually starting his own project. And I talked him into joining my project, and he was like, yes, I love this idea. It was a very similar idea, actually. And he joined me. And then I asked him, who's the best engineer you know? And he told me our friend Gonza. And he's a guy that we knew, together. We would play soccer together as Argentinians here in the Bay Area. And so we enlisted Gonza as the first engineer. And then we hired a forest scientist who brought all the scientific rigor that we needed into the company. And then what happens is that then people start learning about your project and they come to you, right? And the team started growing from there. But I'm so grateful from this early days about the people who believed in just an idea. This is before we raised investment, by the way. At the time, I couldn't pay salaries. So I was like, guys, this is an idea. less risk. You're going to get, generous equity. And eventually you're going to get paid if we raise money or if we start selling to customers. And they believed it. And eventually, it worked out. But yeah, it's so critical to surround yourself with people that can make it happen because, well, now with AI, one can think, that you probably need less people, but you still need a team. And also there's nothing more fun than building something with a team of passionate people.
Yeah, what I've heard at Pachama, culture is massive for you guys. You start every team meeting with some meditation. You guys go on hikes together. These are things that are rituals that are very important to you. Why do you think that's so important as a company to go do things like that?
Yeah. So more generically, I think that every company has to be kind of like a cult or like a movement, right? I think that the most iconic companies have their unique idiosyncrasy that generally represents, the founders, but also the mission, what you're trying to create in the world. And also, I mean, you want to create a world in which you want to live. And that starts with the organization that you are, creating, right? You have the chance to shape it, in a way that you want to see the world. And for me, one of the things that I learned during that sabbatical that I took between companies was meditation and how massively helpful it was for me and for others to center, to find inner peace and more mental clarity and frankly, more connectedness with others and with life. So when we were 3 or 4 people at the beginning of the company, we decided to start every all team meeting with a meditation. And until today, every all team meeting, we start with a 2-minute meditation. And I think the team appreciates it. And yes, doing hikes is another thing that for me is very important. Going into nature, the nature that we want to protect and restore, we want to connect with it. So one thing I do is every time I hire a direct report with me, the last interview is going on a hike, and I think you connect in a different way when you're just walking in nature. You have like a more personal conversation. You may face, a challenge together, climbing a rock or something like that. And that is kind of like some team building there in and of itself. But then we do hikes as well when we do offsites and we try to go together into nature and yeah, it's a great way to build bonds with the team.
It's smart. I had the founders of Plunge here, and they said in the last interview, either go in a sauna or a cold plunge in here. And, people get pretty hot and sweaty and uncomfortable, as you can only imagine. They get to ask these questions while they're in an uncomfortable environment. Diego, something I've observed about you in this podcast is that the first 2 companies have shaped you to who you are today. I feel like you're burnt out for 2 companies. You built companies, obviously, for a purpose of, creating wealth. But now this company today also has wealth, but massive purpose, I should say, at the same time. And you're able to go be the Mr. Miyagi to these people that you're hiring today and just saying, come on this journey and let's go build something special here. And it'll be a great outcome for both yourself financially, but for the world in general too. And I really like that. A question I want to, probe you with is how do you balance pursuit of success while maintaining, personal happiness at the same time? You live in the Bay. You're surrounded by these tech entrepreneurs who are just trying to go saying, I raise more money than you. I have a bigger tech startup. I'm backed by YC. And people just lose sight of what's, true happiness at the same time too. Entrepreneurship should be fun at the same time. And I think people lose sight of that. Walk me through your thoughts through that.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's the other thing that I learned during that sabbatical. The other thing that I did, by the way, on that sabbatical, I went to the Amazon Rainforest. And then after that, I went to Thailand to a meditation retreat in the middle of the mountains. And I was with these Buddhist monks, learning to meditate for 14 days in silence. And I learned a lot about the wisdom of Buddhism and, Eastern philosophies. And that also shaped a lot my current thinking. And one of the things I learned from that is that, yeah, all the things that modern society tells you that you should pursue and that will make you happy is actually wrong. Money, fame, prestige, success, like all these things actually don't produce happiness. In fact, it produces suffering in most of the cases. What really produces happiness is helping others, is having inner peace, is having a loving circle around you, a loving family, a loving group of friends, is being creative and expressing your potential, and hopefully in the service of others, right? And I think that is what entrepreneurship can be a vehicle for, right? So I think that we get it wrong when we think that entrepreneurship is a vehicle for the other things, money, success, and prestige, right? And that's why, so many founders actually suffer, and they end up burnout. Like it happened to me. You're right. My first few companies, yes, I did want to help other people, but I was, kind of like in the mindset of success and making money and so forth. And I gotta tell you, it's true that those things don't make you happy. And of course, as I said, this philosophy doesn't mean that it's easier. It continues to be hard. You can still burn out and you can still have moments of suffering. But if you, at the end of your day, your literal day, can lay down on your bed and say, did I help people today? Or did I advance, a project that will help others in the future? Was I true to my values? Did we have fun, as you said? I think that is what matters. And another thing that also, modern society gets wrong is that we're so obsessed with the future, right? And I get it, like as companies, we have to think on a vision for the future, but the future doesn't exist. The present is the only thing that exists. We're never going to get to the future. Every day is the reality that we live in. So I think it is important to remember that, like the only thing we have is today. Life is too short. And if you don't enjoy the today, if you cannot get the value from these true things today, you're never going to get them. So I think that is some of the things I learned along the way.
What are some things that you would have changed in the last 5 years of building that, if you know what you know now, which is you should work for today, not focus so much on the future because that is an unknown that may not happen, but then do proper work that can fulfill you in the net present moment? Have there been any inflection points in your past that you would have changed?
Yeah, I think I used to worry so much. And again, don't get me wrong, I still worry, especially in this moment of the world with so much uncertainty, right? But I worry a lot less because I have an inner knowing that everything will be all right. As long as I act with integrity and with earnestness, everything will be all right. And you can have different outcomes with your business and with your life, but everything will be all right at the end of the day. I used to worry too much. And when you worry, you cannot enjoy, right? You're like too stressed all the time. You're fearful. You're ego driven. You're thinking too much about, what are people going to think about me, right? And that is, mind killer, right? A monkey mind that never stops, right?
Yeah.
Meditation helps you with that, helps you with observing that and at least letting those clouds pass faster.
Diego, you've grown a lot in the last 5 years between the two companies you built to now this company is, on its way to either be a massive business, and there's no between being a massive business or a small company at this point.
Right. Right.
Who has been, a massive impact in your life? If you have to pinpoint one person, like what have they done for you to really shape you to who you are today?
I guess I would start with my parents. I'm so grateful with them. My dad, he was an architect. Now he's retired and he's doing carpentry. My mom was a biochemist and now she's retired and just enjoying life. But the two of them were so encouraging of me and my brothers. Whatever we wanted to do, they supported us and they believed in our creativity and our potential. And they were our first mentors. Then along the way, I had a lot of mentors and I continued to seek for mentors. The last one that I got the privilege of meeting was Richard Branson. I was at his island and I got to sit in a hot tub with him and ask him advice about business and life. And it was just so amazing to hear from a true legend of business. But I think that you have to have the mindset of always looking for mentors and people who can help you out.
And how do you define personal freedom today, and is it essential to your life?
Yeah, I'm gonna quote the monk that I learned to meditate with. He said, "True freedom is freedom from the ego that is constantly, keeping you trapped in wrong ideas." So to me, true freedom is freedom from the suffering of the ego. And then more generally, I think that freedom to work on what I'm passionate about, and freedom to uh, express myself, through contribution.
Yeah, I think it's massive to understand the purpose of why you're building today, because ultimately it's to get freedom, right? I think we lose sight of that sometimes, that we want to go build these companies to set us free for the future. But there should be a balance. And I think people lose sight of that you should have balance while building. But sometimes you don't have that optionality, especially a lot of people in the proximity of where you live today in the Bay Area. They lose sight of that day in and day out. It's all about how much money can you raise, how big can you make your venture. And they're not even enjoying their own meals, sitting down during lunch and talking to their peers anymore. And it's sad to see. And I think there's a lot of listeners on this podcast today who are just dissatisfied with where they're at today, even though they have companies that are doing even $1 or $2 million of revenue. It's just not enough. So what advice would you give for someone struggling today who is overthinking their business, that even though they're doing well in the perspective of life, that internally they're still struggling today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of the fair life plan is a very wrong one, right? Thinking, well, in the future, I just have to hustle for the next 10 years or 5 years, and then I'm gonna be free, I'm gonna be happy, I'm gonna, chill. But that never happens, right? Life is today, as we were talking about. Look, my advice is it's so difficult to get perspective when you are in the middle of the rat race, when you're in the middle of the work, right? So, to me, what's valuable is to go on retreat, whether that is an actual meditation retreat or whether that is just an escape to nature, or whether that is doing a workshop with a teacher and a mentor, someone who can help you, a coach, right? There are like different types of retreats and opportunities to go out of your normal world and get perspective, ideally with the help of others, whether that is, again, coaches and teachers and mentors, whether that is your brothers or your friends. To me, by the way, that's also very useful to come back to Argentina and get together with my friends from high school, right, which live in a completely different reality than mine here in Silicon Valley. That also brings me back to Earth, right? Find that opportunity to take yourself out of your day-to-day bubble and then come back with a enhanced perspective.
Yeah, I love that. You have a liberating perspective on how to go build companies today, and I think it's the Argentinian in you of living in the Andes and seeing nature, but then understanding how to go build companies while still having a good life doing so, and knowing that nature is an existential part of happiness and being able to see perspective outside of the cubicle of your own business. So I applaud you for that, Diego. As we're rounding out this podcast, I like to ask a couple rapid fire questions at the end. Yeah. Hopefully some don't surprise you too much, but
sure,
let them come top of mind and see what you say. Okay. Whose social media account today do you find most entertaining?
Social media account entertaining. There's one that I actually just started following on Twitter called Woco Capital, that tweets about the markets, but with lots of memes and funny things. And these days he has a lot of material. That's a funny one.
I like that. Money is not an issue. What company are you buying today?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind is Planet, which is a company that has satellites in orbit, capturing images of the planet. It's a publicly traded company. It's a small one, but they're publicly traded. But I think that they have an amazing potential in the future, and I would love to integrate them with Pachama.
Sounds like a great platform acquisition for you guys, huh?
Right. What
is one tool or resource you cannot live without?
One tool of resource I cannot live without. Well, definitely my iPhone. It's an important resource, but going deeper, I would say that probably meditation, which is something I do daily with my iPhone. Actually, I use an app to meditate, but yeah, meditation and an iPhone with internet connection, and I'm gonna be fine.
Okay. You said you interacted with Richard Branson. Who's another person you've interacted with in the business setting that has been most impactful in your life?
The two that come to mind is Mark Benioff, who is the founder of Salesforce. I also was very inspired by his purposeful and values-driven leadership. He built a company that, yes, it's a SaaS company, but they're doing so much good in the world, with the different models that they have for impact at the company. and had the privilege of meeting him a few times. And then I would say another one that comes to mind is Chris Tompkins. She was the CEO of Patagonia and the co-founder of the North Face. And after she exited these two companies, she dedicated her life and her money and her time with her husband, who now has passed away, to buy land in Argentina and Chile and then donate it to national parks and then rewild those lands. And I found it so inspiring. And yeah, I'm very fortunate to call her an acquaintance. I don't know if a friend, but we do know each other.
I love that. What's next for you on your entrepreneurial path? And then where will Diego be in 5 years?
For now is navigating these weird times with Pachama. It's a time to adapt. It's a time to, focus on what we can be the best in the world at and continue to try to help. Our market is going through a winter time, a difficult time, right? In these geopolitical uncertain times. But ultimately, I think that these markets will be huge, are so needed for humanity to ensure a safe pathway to a future with sustainability. So for now, for us is to adapt, survive, and adapt to, and kind of like position ourselves for the next wave of growth that we know this market will have. And where will life will find me in 5 years? I have no idea. As I said, I try to live in the present moment and then let life guide me.
Diego, you're a wealth of knowledge. I think the audience is going to appreciate this podcast so much, and I appreciate your time today. Where can people find out more about you and Pachama?
Well, our website is pachama.com, and then I am on X and LinkedIn. These are the two social networks I use, and more than happy to connect with anybody that we can help. And thank you so much, Sam, for inviting us.
100%.